Please listen carefully.
Welcome to the Retail Conversations podcast. This is Morten Max. Happy New Year, everybody. In this short intro, there will be some repetition information from a former episode, which was in Danish. Switching languages on the different episodes is, of course, adding some complexity to the concept, but with the Danish-speaking guest that I get the chance to talk to, I let them decide which language we go for, and I think that's for the best. You can now also listen to the podcast on iTunes and on your podcast app, either on iOS or Android. Just search Retail Conversations and you should be good to go. And if you feel like you are more than welcome to send back some stars. The 5 stars are, of course, the best ones to receive. I personally prefer the podcast app and SoundCloud as it is more easygoing and doesn't have to be in the front of your device. I will try to launch a new episode every other week at least, but I do have a company that I run as well. So you are more than welcome to send comments and feedback to the podcast our way. You can do this via our email retailconversations@maxretail.dk. You might even have a retail profile in mind that you find relevant for me to invite to the podcast. And if so, I would be very interested in hearing from you. Future conversations lined up for the English-speaking listeners. We will soon have Mark Christian Riebe, who is the CEO and founder of eLocations Limited, which is a real estate marketplace which strives to have 3 million locations in 20,000 cities around the world. Also soon to be launched will be the episode with Christina Vettel. She is a personal shopper, stylist, and sales and service power woman. We had some collaborations some years ago with a training and performance project in Sweden, and we will be talking about the importance of knowing our products, about personal styling, and the importance of being close to the stores. And lastly, we will have Sebastian Paulson, where we will be digging into the competence of lighting and ambience in our stores. That's going to be very interesting and learning for me personally as well. Today I am speaking with Christoffer Borup. Christoffer is the co-founder of MOBARO, which is, in a simplified version, a compliance platform for the industry. It is a solution that I know quite well, as I have been lucky enough to play a continuous role in the development of the solution. If you think we are selling the solution too much in this episode, well, it is the solution that I am recommending on the market, but of course there are a lot of other suppliers out there. Then I would focus on the importance of what we are talking about mainly here. Personally, I use the MOBARO solution in my projects to keep track and support the execution level in my projects. And now I bring you Christoffer Borup. I'm sitting here with Christoffer Borup from MOBARO. Christoffer, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be part of your series of podcasts.
Christoffer, just to start off with a little bit of framing here, you and me, we've known each other for some years now. Especially from my time in Bestseller and Jack & Jones, we cooperated especially with a lot of mystery shopping via the company that you can also elaborate a little bit on Shoptimizer back in the day. But that transformed into a cooperation with the company you're currently in, MOBARO, which we're going to talk a lot about today. The reason why I think it's very relevant and very interesting to have you on the podcast and talk about the MOBARO solution as well is that I use the solution myself internally as a consultant now, and also it is the solution I would recommend a retailer to work with when we talk about compliance and talk about actually supporting the execution of our concept. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And in those terms, I think it would be very relevant to have a conversation on, okay, what is this part of retail and what can this kind of a solution, because there are of course also other suppliers out there and competitors. What can you offer to the table to retail to help the competitive edge out there?
So I'm really looking forward to talking about that, Christoffer. But just to start off, give a little bit of an insight into who you are, your background to where you are now working in MOBARO.
Well, you could say MOBARO came out of a company called Shoptimizer. Shoptimizer is the leading provider of mystery shopping in Denmark. Throughout the international network that we built in Shoptimizer and throughout all the different customers that we were lucky enough to work with in Shoptimizer, we saw the need for new solutions in retail. We were 3 partners in Shoptimizer: Jens Holm Møller, Henrik Have, and myself. And a couple of years ago, we decided to found MOBARO, where we're all sitting right now. And we've been building that business now for a couple of years with funding it with money from different investors. And of course, spending a lot of time on developing our product and developing our client base. My role in that company is, you could say I'm the director of our retail division. We're operating in 2 different verticals in MOBARO. One is for retail and one is for amusement parks, covering quite different demands for both these, you could say, for both verticals, but also quite similar needs. In retail, it's all about reducing the gap between a head office and the rest of the organization. I think we would all acknowledge that in a retail organization, there's a lot of communication to be shared and a lot of feedback to be collected.
A little bit.
Yeah, in order to even open the doors in the morning. And we just saw a while back that a lot of retailers are struggling to comply with this, struggling to actually meet the standards they want to. A lot of money is spent on developing concepts, developing campaigns and campaign guidelines, without no one actually knowing whether or not things are being done according to the way they intended it to be. That's probably the heaviest value proposition that we're bringing about with MOBARO, is actually bringing retailers from hoping into knowing whether or not they're executing on the stuff that they are planning to do. That's one thing for retail. I'll dive into that in a second. The other vertical in MOBARO is about the amusement park industry. And we also co-created you could say, a silver bullet for that industry, a product that fits perfectly to the processes of securing, basically safety and maintenance processes in a park. The main building in an amusement park, where you would have the park manager sitting, and he would be managing a bunch of technicians. So he would have a team of, for instance, 15 technicians, depending of the size of the park, who are working in the morning to make sure that all the rides are safe and secured for children to enter the ride at 10 o'clock, to make sure that these rides are being maintained. These are big constructions. So you might have, for some rides you might have 20, for other rides you might have 70 checkpoints or 100 checkpoints that you really need to attend to every day to make sure that everything is safe and maintained correctly.
Basically, Christoffer, if I'm a user, either at the retail vertical or in the park vertical, when I, as an end user, am using it, what do I see? What do I experience?
What we do is, let's dive into retail. If I'm a store manager in a retail chain, I'm under a lot of pressure because we're cutting back on resources, basically in all retail chains. That's what we're seeing anyway. So it's all about doing more with less. So as a store manager, you would have the responsibility of making the most of the resources you have available, right? And you're also being pushed to make sure that it's all about the customer experience, right? So you need to face the customers as much as possible. You need to guide your team to face the customers in the best possible way to create the best possible experiences, because that drives financial performance. That takes a lot of detail. That takes a lot of operational activities, or you could say operations-related activities, that has to be done every day, on a weekly basis, on a daily basis. That might be on a quarterly basis. Health and safety stuff, management routines regarding whatever, all the stuff. What we did with MOBARO, or what we've done with MOBARO, is to try and simplify this a little bit. Try to make sure that we support that store manager in the best possible way to make sure that he has information available when it's relevant, and that he can actually feed back to, for instance, either the area management or to the head office and different colleagues at head office whether or not this particular store is ready for customers today, whether or not this particular store is ready for the campaign that arrives on Thursday, and so on and so forth. And that's all set up on a mobile device via an app that he downloads from whatever app store he has access to. And he would get a unique login for that to access the content that's relevant to him or to her. And then the system is built around checklists and task management. And when I say task management, people would probably go, well, we all know these different task management platforms that are impossible almost to operate. And it almost take a Prince 2 certificate to even understand what's going on. Try to simplify this, so make it extremely user-friendly. Only do what's necessary to capture the details of a task, and to share it easily with whoever it's relevant for, to predefine that, so you don't have to take that decision yourself. That's all done from the head office, because the head office is in complete control of what's in that app, what's in that checklist, or in that task. You could say the way we set up a certain task. So let's take an example. It's Monday morning. From the head office, you would want to know whether or not all our 100 stores are ready. Monday after Black Friday, and it's been a busy week. Everybody's been working very hard, and it's been all hands on deck to just deal with sales, basically. How do our stores look on the following Monday? Are we ready to actually welcome the customers who didn't come and visit us on the Friday, or the customers who want to complain about something that they purchased, like they want to claim something? Whoever visits our stores on the Monday should have the premium experience that they had on that Friday, where we did everything we could to be ready. So that might take 5 or 6 different questions for you as a store manager to sign off to. So how does the storefront look today? Is it the right? Did we remove the Black Friday campaign banners? Or maybe one of the store managers did not notice that there's actually an A sign standing in front of the store that includes some kind of promotion of the Black Friday activity. So of course that needs to be changed into something that's relevant for this week or for today. What about the entrance of the store? What about the front table that might be, let's say it's a fashion store, there might be something on the front tables where you want to promote certain articles, right? How does that look? That's the stuff that drives sales, right? That's the stuff that should work as a magnet for customers to enter our stores. Is that all right? And I'm pretty sure that most chain managers would recognize the frustration about not knowing whether or not this is in place, because we're not there. We can't be everywhere, right? So that's some information that's driven from head office, right? We want to know this. And now we can easily get this information, and it's easy for our store managers to provide this information. That's one of the tasks that we would do. Now, if that campaign poster in the A sign in front of the store for Black Friday, for instance, hadn't been changed, and it had to be replaced by a new campaign poster, but you didn't get that campaign poster from marketing, it would be very easy for your store manager to register this and say, no, we still haven't replaced it with a new poster because we didn't receive it. And we know that in this question or whatever answers related to this particular checkpoint in the checklist, we always know that that would be something regarding marketing. So the task that comes out of it is directed at marketing. So someone in marketing in the head office is now automatically notified that this particular store is in need of a campaign poster ASAP. To actually
comply with what we're expecting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that would be a micro example of a procedure that.
But it happens out there. Right. It happens out there.
Yeah.
So basically, it's a set of checklists, or one or more checklists you define based on what your needs are, that you can have as a standard compliance checklist, you could say, to make sure that every week or every month you do a 360 perspective on your store, maybe. But it could also be a daily one, right? That actually fluctuates.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you have a need to know something tomorrow, you can actually define it and push it out to the whole organization.
Yes, you can. Yeah. And then capture the feedback in a structured way, where all the results are aggregated into something that is actually tangible for you. Yeah. Because I think the problem in many organizations is that we ask for a lot of feedback or they would ask for a lot of feedback from the rest of the organization, and then that feedback is sent back via emails, and you can't really aggregate the content of an email, right? So you would have, let's say, 80 of your store managers actually managed to answer you, and now you would have 80 different emails containing answers from 80 different store managers, and now all we can say now is that have a nice Friday evening sorting that out, because that's what people do today in many organizations. We want to ease that process and make it easier for the people who are actually working as a support function for the stores, meaning the head office, because that is the main purpose of the head office. Make it easier for them to support the people who need the most support. That's probably what we would see coming out of applying MOBARO.
Your solution.
Yeah.
For me personally, and dear listener, whoever is listening right now, there is no money between MOBARO and me. Even though I use it as a supplier, it's because I have not seen a solution on the market that I would recommend better. So, but for me, Christoffer, one of the aspects when I reflect on it that made me grab the MOBARO solution was actually that even though it can be called like a communication platform, it can also be called a compliance solution, right, to the market. And in many ways, fair to say that. But for me, it's actually a very strong management tool. That you would probably, it's probably also something you called it. But from my perspective, even if I was a store manager, area manager, retail manager, or whoever in retail, it's a strong management tool to supply a good balance between leadership, feelings, and data.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, actually.
So that's for me is something that can really work wonders for me. And I'm not trying to sell the solution, I'm just trying it because I really like the solution here. And in that sense, it can also sometimes overcome some of the complications that we will talk about in a little while in our conversation on that people will see this as compliance, control, or whatever, you know. You've probably faced this as well many times, but it's really a strong management tool that allows you to measure, are we ready for our consumer? I think that's extremely relevant to be able to know instead of just feel, you know.
At least what we see though is that when we ask retail managers whether or not they are ready for the consumer, ready basically if as we said in our website, if their stores are dressed to kill on campaign opening day, right? And they're not able to answer that with a simple yes or no. They would all say, most of them would say, we sure hope so. And I think that's basically that's the mindset we want to replace by we know they are.
We know that we are 87% ready, and the last 13% are being fixed right now before opening the doors.
For instance.
Yeah. Okay. I think there's another aspect to the solution I would really like to dig into also here. So you gather this data through these checklists, whether it's a store manager who's doing the measurements or it's an area manager doing it in his area of stores. It could also be the retail director who comes out. There's another aspect here. Then you gather this data, and then you're able to visualize it in a way. Tell me a little bit about when the data comes in and what happens after that.
Yeah, and actually that's a very important dimension, right? Yeah. Because otherwise we might there's no reason in capturing all that data. But you're right. I would say that's probably where you'll see the biggest edge for MOBARO, positive or competitive edge for MOBARO, is that there's so many different solutions out there in terms of, for instance, tablet survey solutions, all kinds of different survey software SaaS solutions, right? There's also a lot of communication platforms out there that are brilliant, and of course, with mobile-first strategies popping up everywhere right now, I would say down the line, let's say at least 3 to 5 years down the line, you probably won't see many retailers who are not on a mobile-first strategy or executing on a mobile-first strategy, and you probably won't see that many retail stores accessing their intranet via a PC, right? They'll do it via the mobile, and of course they would need some kind of solution to support that. So these are different solutions that provide all kinds of value today in terms of getting feedback from customers, for instance, in the survey solutions, or at least pushing information to the organization or quizzing the the organization on different companies competencies, right? Yeah. With MOBARO, we collect all kinds of facts about what's actually going on. We structure these data, we aggregate these data, and then we push the results in the direction of the people to whom that is relevant via a dashboard, via PDF reports that are automatically generated after you've completed a checklist, for instance. Once you submit a checklist, all this information is automatically directed at the people to whom it's relevant. So to take an example, as an area manager, for instance, we know for a fact that area managers spend so much time driving around between stores, but also feeding back to stores after they came back from a store visit. So if you want to visit as many stores as you can, so let's say you have 15 stores in your district, you'd probably, on a good day, on a very good day, you might be visiting 3 stores. On a quite a normal day, you might be visiting a couple of stores. But when you come back from those visits, you've had all kinds of discussions with your store managers, all sorts of details. Some of it might be top level, some of it might be more into detail. But you might, and then you sit down in the evening once you've tucked your kids in, and then you would write emails for your store managers and say, "Oh, we covered these and these things today. Make sure to follow up with whoever in buying, whoever in marketing, or as we talked about, just outside the store, there were some problems with the poster in the lower left corner of the window." All that stuff takes a lot of time, and it doesn't really give you a happy life, does it? As an area manager, you're just working 24 hours.
I think for some it's the happy life because they're so engulfed in it, but there's actually a solution on the market, and more solutions probably that can actually give you more time to just breathe, and focus on other things.
Exactly, yeah. And or they register all this stuff maybe in an Excel sheet where they already have some kind of checklist, or whatever way they're working today. What we see is that we bring them to another level with MOBARO because, first of all, we make sure that all area managers work they have the same way of working. So you'd set some kind of structure as to what's included in a store visit. How do I perform a store visit the best possible way? What areas should I cover with my store manager? And what would be the minimum level of information that I'm actually taking away from that meeting? So that would be done via the checklist functionality in MOBARO on a tablet or on a smartphone. So you would go through this in a structured way as you walk through the store. Once you've completed it, including all the tasks, including all the pictures that you took underway or during the visit. Even if you wanted to annotate pictures, for instance, make a drawing on a picture, editing a picture, you can also do that, add that as a feedback. And once you've completed this conversation with your store manager, you're submitting the checklist, and now a PDF report is automatically generated in MOBARO within the time it takes to send it, basically. But within 30 seconds, in the inbox of your store manager, there'll be a report now based on what you covered. And in your own inbox, and also, of course, accessible via your admin login in MOBARO, you'll have a report that covers everything. Besides that, or you could say a feedback report for conversation or for following up. So now you don't have to sit down when you come back and you've tucked in your kids. Now you can sit in your couch for 10 minutes and watch the news or watch a game, because it's all being done for you. Besides that, all the data that came out of this, all the data that was registered in this report, is now also brought to the next level in your organization. So now whoever's the chain manager, or whoever's the marketing director, or whoever sits wherever they're sitting in the organization, they can now actually access what was covered during a store visit in a store. And you're able to aggregate on a market, you could say on a district or a market level or on a chain level, how we're actually performing on some of the intangibles of our organization. I remember when we, with you guys in setting it all up back in the days in Jack and Jones, some of these core skills, some of these core competencies as a retailer.
Yeah, because the angle of actually looking at each competence is also very interesting. So it would be not only the physical area of the store you define in different areas of your compliance checklist. It could also be the compliance of operations, a total. It could also be the compliance of cleaning. It could also be the compliance of service. I know it would be something you would also want to measure externally inside, Absolutely. And I think that's where it becomes really interesting. But it can also go to internal departments of marketing, buying, etc. To say, hey, here we have 5 predefined things we want to secure from buying. That also gets aggregated into something that helps buying get closer to the stores. And I think that's also a really valuable aspect of your solution. Okay, enough selling of the solution. I will always recommend it. so
You're doing a good job.
yeah, thank you for that. But just to back a little bit back, you've been a part of Shoptimizer, and then it transformed with you three partners, founding partners. You came in after, of course. Henrik and Jens founded Shoptimizer, and you came in as now the third partner of the company. And then you've transformed it into MOBARO. But you as a profile in not necessarily retail, where do you come from before?
Where do I come from? So you could say education-wise, I'm from the Aarhus Business School. It's changed its name 3 times, I think, since it constantly keeps changing. But I hold a master degree in corporate communication, and that's also I think that's really fueled my interest in this field, because this is all about communication, right? And this is all about getting communication right, and also, of course, looking at the consequences or at least failing to get communication right. When we started looking at founding MOBARO, so Jens and Henrik and I, of course, we co-founded MOBARO, and the process of doing that included speaking with different investors, and we were part of a program in the early days of MOBARO, and that's not that far away, isn't it? But where someone was helping us, for instance, just how do you form a value proposition? How do you write up a value proposition? What's in it? And how do you get it? How do you nail it to communicate that sharply and concise? So what this guy said, that long is lazy, brief is hard, and that was just so true. Everything is about getting into the core of what you want done, how you want it done, who's going to do it, when, all that stuff that comes with distance management, right? That takes a lot of communication skills, because if you start, I would say the more brief you are in your communication, the more it could be, the more directly you communicate, and the more direct you are in the way you communicate, the higher, I would say, the risk of the people receiving your communication of seeing it as some kind of strict orders, right?
So kind of a demand, kind of a control-ish.
Yeah. So how do I balance that out? When, for instance, implementing something like MOBARO, how do I make sure that we don't over-communicate, we don't under-communicate? Because when we start under-communicating, or when we start being too direct in our communication, it will conflict with at least the management culture that we're seeing in Scandinavia.
Yeah, you're opening up a door now to a very interesting aspect of your solution, because I would imagine, also from the experience I would imagine in retailers here, is that the solution itself is brilliant. And of course we will always develop it to become even more brilliant. Yeah, that's the name of the game, of course. But there's an aspect of when we now use this and start using it even more and so on in the organization on different levels, how do we then use this in the optimum way? And you're opening up the door now to some things you must have faced in terms of how do we then communicate the data in the right, motivating, inspiring, involving way, right? So what kind of difficulties do you experience here?
It's a big concern for all of them to make sure that this actually sits right in their organization, to make sure that we don't end up implementing something that would be considered yet another control tool from the head office, because that's not the initial intention. That's not what the head office wants. That's not what MOBARO wants. And of course, at the end of the day, that's not what neither area managers or store managers or team members want. Looking at it completely objectively, you could say that if you implement a structure for feedback or for communication or for some kind of frequency for people to interact about certain things and to feedback on whether or not you are ready on this and that, it would be the eyes that see it that define whether or not this is control or communication. But what we've seen so far is that as long as the head office understands and are ready to act on the fact that their most important role is being to support the stores, of course also to set strategies and to get everything done and tactics and all that, but in everyday operations they are a support function for the stores. That also means that when we are asking for some kind of feedback, we're not trying to control whether or not you have done it, whether or not your response, it's not to place responsibility. It's not to place some certain responsibilities at store managers, but it's in order to understand whether or not it's ready. If it isn't, why, and who's doing anything about it, and what does it take for us to get up to speed here. So that might involve someone from the head office. So if that is coming back to the poster we talked about before, the fact that this poster is not in place, who's got the responsibility for that? Would that be the store manager's fault? Or would it be someone in marketing who happened to be on holiday on the day that was shipped off to the store in the wrong dimensions, or whatever happened? So we don't really care about who's to blame for something not being in place. We care about getting stuff done. So I think that's the overall message that needs to be communicated when implementing systems like these. And that's some of the stuff that we're bringing about when we implement MOBARO. So I hope that answers your questions.
Yeah, it's first and foremost, as you say, it's the balance of how we approach it in the way of what is our mindset in supporting these stores. I think everybody would say they are supporting and that's their role, but are we really doing that in the real world? Or where can we be a little bit sharper in that? And then the other angle okay, how do we then communicate it and speak this MOBARO world in our way, in the right way, with a balance? In my experience, I have seen also that when the solution comes in, it gets the initial wow, as many things. And then you hit that gap we're talking about now in terms of how do people actually see the store? So now we have the same compliance list. We have, let's say, 50 points we want to measure a store on. And I can go in with any team and there will be a variance. And I've seen big variances in teams working together for a long time. But that's where I'm also saying that's brilliant that we are now able to take that dialogue together and say, you scored it 85% ready for the consumer, I scored it 55. Let's have a dialogue about where the differences are and how we should see it as a concept. And I think then it becomes all of a sudden a synchronization tool on the concept. And then that furthers the possibility to develop concepts even stronger, you could say. And I've experienced a lot of gaps, but you need that dialogue.
Yeah, that's right.
But that's where I use this word deliberately. It's a dialogue.
Yeah.
It's a process of narrowing that gap, and maybe it will never be a variance of 0. Maybe it shouldn't be, but we should get as close to that number as possible, instead of having 25 percentage points difference.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And that's, of course, that depends a lot on the scenario in which you use it, because as a dialogue tool, as some kind of soft feedback coaching tool, you could say, it's a brilliant framework to say, okay, now we're going to see, what about this room right now? The room that we're sitting in right now, is it messy? Or is it just top notch? We would probably have different opinions on that, just you and I between us. So it all comes down to the way you ask your questions. So how objectively can we, or the level of you could say, facts that you're basing your answers on. So is it in place? Is it not in place? That would be one thing to ask for if you're setting it up as a distant management tool, right? So when you ask something from a head office towards the store, some operations related questions as to is this, let's say, the campaign poster that we just invested 500 trillion in actually distributing to all our stores. Did you receive it? Did you receive it in the right dimension? Is it in place in your window? Is it sitting in the window according to guidelines? Those guidelines will be right next to it in the checklist, so you can see exactly what to do. So that's a matter of defining, instead of measuring if something is in place, we go back a step. We just take a step back and say, what does it take for me to actually assess that? I need some information about, or a definition of, when am I ready, right? So that's a very important part of it. But you're absolutely right. So in that use case where some manager might do a store visit, for instance, use the tool for that, and the store manager afterwards might do the same visit just to compare. Of course, depending on the way you set it up, depending on the level of subjectivity that you add to the report, you'll have different opinions. That's what it's all about. That's what moves you, isn't it? So I'm completely with you on that.
Okay, so beyond the things we've touched upon now, what kind of other aspects do you experience that your partners or business partners experience when they use a solution like MOBARO? What other things do you face?
One of the fields I would say that that is growing very much now in terms of the usage of the platform is the regulatory compliance part. Regulatory compliance. So whether or not are you complying with all kinds of
legal standard. Yeah.
All this stuff that there's a lot to cover. Actually, this morning I was just sitting with our UK director, Claire Bailey, discussing bits and pieces regarding some of the projects that we are running in UK right now. She knows a lot about retail in the UK. She just read me a list of the different things that a retailer in UK needs to comply with in order to actually comply with legislation. It's quite incredible, actually. It's an immense amount of information that you would need to deliver on just as a store manager, and the consequences of not delivering on that. Everything from, let's say you're dealing with food, for instance, big problems. Everybody knows that. But now with GDPR coming around, the data protection regulation that's coming out in May 2018, there's so much stuff that needs to be fed back on, that you need to make sure that this is in place. We need a structure to make sure that we capture this information at in certain intervals throughout the organization. So that's something that's definitely moving now, and where we can provide a lot of value to retailers who are not able to capture this information in other ways. That's basically where checklists came from, isn't it? In all kinds of contexts. Checklists have been around forever, but checklists in, for instance, restaurant chains, of course, that's a basic part of running a restaurant. So that would be one area that we will definitely see growing. I would see everywhere. Everybody needs to comply with more and more all the time. We need to structure that. Another one would be the level of analysis that's put into the data, or that's based on the data that we're capturing. How can we take all this data and put it into use, or use this data to make the organization even more intelligent about what's actually going on? And I would say the preventive dimension. So the preventive, when you go to all kinds of, let's say the technicians in a park, for instance, they would be putting a lot of effort into preventive maintenance, understanding or setting up procedures to prevent things from breaking. I would say that what we've seen in some retail organizations is that you could say you're treating symptoms, right? So when you spot something's not right, you register that, you fix it, and then you move on. If you stopped for another 15 seconds to understand what's wrong here, who's actually taking care of it, when will this be fixed, and then I would say maybe the most important point, why did this happen in the first place? What's the root cause behind the issue that we're seeing here? Could we put a headline to that? Could this be something that's inventory related? Could this be management related, communication related? Whatever issues that come up within your organization, to quickly capture that information and aggregate that information across your organization to see where are basically the pitfalls in our operations. That's something that we will be working a lot with in MOBARO, besides doing the basics, making sure that all the sales driving elements in your stores or in your districts or in your organization as a whole are actually in place. We also want to help our clients or customers understand why something is not in place.
Very interesting. Yeah. It makes me think about an aspect here that when you have this, when you use MOBARO as a daily part of the organization, let's say a shop manager does this checklist once a week and has done it for some time. District manager does the same together with the store manager when he comes, blah, blah, blah. We have a list of checklists now, and we then can look at the data on our dashboard and say, okay, in my district, through these competencies and these area physical in stores, this is my level of performance together with my teams. Then it becomes interesting, as you say, to look at why am I here where I am, but it also becomes interesting to look at best cases. Oh, the classical word here, I hate it, but you get my point. In terms of, okay, this district manager is performing above average here. What is he or she doing, or the teams in there doing even better, that we can comply with, that we can look at and sort of copy paste, if you would say, to the other districts. So it becomes also a potential learning platform, you could say, in some way. Not a learning platform in terms of competencies, and that's not what we're talking about here. But that's also a very valuable aspect, I think, to the solution itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what is this guy doing in this store that makes him do 95% average, when our compliance average is 75?
For instance.
What is that guy or girl doing that we need to look at? And why is that working? You know, so it's as you say, it's not only finding the why behind the symptoms, it's also finding the why behind the best of them.
You're right. Yeah,
I think that's
absolutely
really relevant as well to add.
Yeah.
And it becomes data-driven combined with the other elements of that it's a social system we're working with and managing. I think that's also very relevant.
Also, it's a good way of reaching out for or at least establishing some tangible to reveal the hidden processes in your organization. Make it tangible, make it measurable, and when you can measure something, you can act on it, right? That's what it takes.
So where do you see retail in terms of your solution at the moment? Are you seeing the industry getting more mature in terms of investing in these kind of solutions, even your competitors? Or where do you see the barometer on that one?
I see all the right intentions. We also see a lot of traction towards our solution, and yeah, of course, we're very, very humble and happy about that. But I also, of course, acknowledge the fact that, or appreciate the fact that the digitalization of a retail organization is a heavy investment, isn't it? So if you want to go mobile in an organization of 500 stores, or at least just 100 stores, depending on whoever you are, it's a massive the front-loaded investment is quite heavy for them to invest in just hardware, IT infrastructure, basically, to make sure that all stores have access to some kind of network. If they don't pay for that, get it all up and running so they are actually connected to at least the internet on a mobile device. And I think that some chains are in a position right now financially where they are maybe doing what they did yesterday, hoping for that to bring them to the next level. And hoping for that, maybe just focusing on the basics of running a retail organization, and then they are coping with the frustrations that come with it. And then, of course, we see some of the other retailers that may have a little bit more resources to invest in these kinds of activities, or maybe they recognize that they have to do so at some point to enter a digital age. So I would say I'm very split on that. That is indeed very 50-50, depending on the retailers that we're meeting. But even the big chains, even where you would expect them to have a whole store full of tablets for their employees, are struggling to even put a smartphone in that store for all kinds of reasons. Some of them being practical reasons, because or security reasons, or there's so much that comes with this decision, right? That's something. So that's some of the stuff that we are seeing, of course, and we must say that in order to implement MOBARO, you need to have access to some kind of mobile device to make it work.
Okay, so that's an aspect you see in trending right now, but
yeah, I would say so. But definitely moving forward at high pace. But it's just big decisions for these.
Yeah, and it's not just a stroke of a pen decision. It's one thing is actually coming to the point where you make the decision to invest in MOBARO or another solution here in terms of compliance and concept compliance. Another angle is that also your ability to follow through and actually be consistent and stick to the why you did this. What is it we want to achieve with this? And it will take some time. In my experience working with this, with your solution, but other solutions, is that even though I might be mind-blowing clear about my why, I need to make sure that everybody that I meet and encounter in this journey wants to be a part of that journey and takes on the same and flies on the same plane as me. Yeah. So I think the why part is extremely. I know that's a classical word we use from Simon Sinek, right? But the ability to actually make sure that we create the right purpose and communicate that, invite people on the journey and give meaning to everybody who are relevant to use this for. Sorry for my English here. But I also think it's very relevant also to be very you need to be conscious and aware about how you are involving different parts of your organization in a process like this. Yeah. This is not the part of our conversation, but one thing is the brilliant solution itself. But in order for that to become successful internally with your clients, I could imagine that some will also be struggling a little bit with maybe the why part. Maybe now the decision has been made, how do we actually make it work and be integrated in our organization? Yeah. How do we make the right stakeholders want to be a part of the journey? How do we get them on board? Yeah. How do we involve them, and how much should they be involved? And then also the balance I sometimes struggle with is how much content and how little content should we have in these different kind of compliance measurements. I've made solutions that are too long, too short, too specific, too unspecific. I've been all around the world on that one. You probably also experienced that. Yeah. And then I would say the acceptance that this is a process. I think you might get initial success, but I will not say that's not the full potential of a solution like yours, I would say.
No, it takes some broad implementation, and what we do to make this a success, basically, because we recognize this, and but we also respect it, because there's no point in trying to push for a solution. And as you just said, and we do believe, and we also get the feedback that we have managed to develop, say, state-of-the-art software, but it can be as state-of-the-art as it wants if it isn't implemented correctly. Yeah, if it isn't being used, it's just sitting there being pretty and expensive, right? So everybody at least that feels expensive if you're not using it. So you need to get that implementation right. Our approach to this is to always initiate a new, you could say, client activity by a pilot project. So we have this and we are definitely developing that, you could say, that framework for pilot projects heavily these days, because we are setting up a lot of pilots right now. And that's a 4-week period of time where, in an intense collaboration between us and the right contacts, the right stakeholders in that company, in the client company, we arrange for all the content that would be relevant for them to test, to make sure, basically it's like a proof of concept, to make sure that that everybody who's part of the project in the future would find this user-friendly, would find this helpful, that the data that generates, the actions it generates, is actually driving a good business case for the client before we scale it. So we would pick out, for instance, 5 stores in a district, 1 district manager, if they have regions, a regional manager and a sales director, for instance. And we would sit down with that team and say, what should be in here? Of course, we have suggestions for that, but what should be in here to make this, just, you could say, indiscussable, valuable to you guys. Then we activate it, then we follow up and we drive that project fully supported. And then after 4 weeks, we would evaluate on that process with the client and see what does it take from here in order to scale this in your organization. Because that's, at the end of the day, that's what they want, and that's what, of course, we want to do. So we believe that's quite a serious approach to it, and a way of respecting the fact that we need to test this within this particular culture, and all cultures are different, and all operations structures are different, to acid test that this is actually going to work for them. Cool. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And then based on that, they will have enough information and experience with the solution in order for them to make a decision on scaling or not scaling.
Exactly. Yeah, we always do. But that's actually quite standard for us. That we would set up some specific success criteria for the pilot project for us to comply with, basically. So that's how it works. So that makes everything very tangible.
So is there anything we're missing here, Christoffer, in our dialogue or conversation right now?
I think there's one very important, strong point to make here about what we see in retail, and that's the great intentions we see in the head offices today. And I would say we always took, now as we've covered some of these control elements, right, to say, okay, depending on the way you are delivering a project, it might be considered control, or it might be considered helpful communication, right? And the intentions from all the head offices that we're working with are good. They come with peace. They come, and all they want is to bring their chain forward I would say, for most retailers, really hard times. So instead of just asking the store managers or the area managers to speed up, they also want to help them work more efficiently, facilitate efficient operations, basically. And that comes with some level of controlling procedures or setting up, just like you control your financial performance, you would also need to somehow control your processes, right? And to quality control, that we're actually doing things according to best practice, and that should be in anybody's interest, and that's the agenda that they're trying to push forward now. But they're struggling, as I see it, they are struggling to communicate this in a way that doesn't demotivate, and not necessarily only with MOBARO, but in all kinds of different contexts, that doesn't demotivate the rest of the organization. So the intentions are good. I would say the way that it's being communicated, or at least the way that it sits in the front line, sits with the front line, is not necessarily always the way it was intended in the first place. So there's big opportunities, I think, in bridging that gap, I would say.
Yeah, and linking to maybe some of the things we've talked about earlier in our conversation, I also see the importance of that aspect. And what I'm thinking here is that sometimes the solution itself that might face some challenges or some barriers for not just getting the full execution right away or within a time limit is sometimes maybe related to the general gap between HQ and the stores, not necessarily the solution itself. So that's also, again, back to what you talked about, what is the why or the reason behind the symptoms here. And there could be a gap, I'm not saying there is, but there could be a gap in your organization that is actually helping you not succeed optimally with a solution like MOBARO here. And it makes me think about an article or a post I read from Jan Dahl Andersen, who I will not give complete honor to right now because I cannot remember the full 15 or 16 execution barriers. But he made a post on LinkedIn that I can post on to this. I think it's very relevant that in any type of organization, in terms of execution, there are X amount of barriers for execution. So I think also adding that to the equation here is very relevant. So Jan Dahl Andersen is a really interesting angle on that. But also still keeping it simple. If people are interested or want to get in touch with you or with MOBARO, how do they best do that?
Oh, there are all sorts of channels for that. They can reach me, of course, on cb@mobaro.com. They can go to mobaroretail.com, where they can read more about what MOBARO Retail does. They can watch a few video cases on what MOBARO Retail actually does. And I think that should be sufficient. Write an email to me or visit our website and I'll help them out. You can also, via the website, you can also book a presentation of MOBARO. There are all sorts of ways of doing that. Okay. You're definitely being motivated to do so once you visit the website. That's something our marketing friends help.
Call to action buttons.
Oh yeah, different calls of action. Yeah.
Well, Christoffer, thank you very much for your time.
Likewise.